The Jerusalem Bible, Leviticus chapter 9. On the 8th day Moses summoned Aaron and his sons and the elders of Israel. He said to Aaron, "Take a calf to offer a sacrifice for sin, and a ram for a holocaust, both without blemish, and bring them before Yahweh. Then say to the sons of Israel, Take a goat to be offered as a sacrifice for sin, and as a holocaust a calf and a lamb, both 1 year old and without blemish, and for communion sacrifice an ox and a ram to be immolated before Yahweh, and finally an oblation mixed with oil, for Yahweh will appear to you today." They brought what Moses had commanded in front of the tent of meeting. Then the whole community came and stood before Yahweh. Moses said, "This is what Yahweh has ordered to be done, so that his glory may be visible to you." Moses then addressed Aaron, "Go to the altar and offer your sacrifice for sin and your holocaust, and so perform the rite of atonement for yourself and your family. Then present the people's offering and perform the rite of atonement for them, as Yahweh has ordered." Aaron went to the altar and immolated the calf as a sacrifice for his own sin. Then the sons of Aaron presented the blood to him, and he dipped his finger in it and put some of it on the horns of the altar, and then poured out the rest of the blood at the foot of the altar. The fat of the sacrifice for sin, and the kidneys, and the fatty mass which is over the liver, he burned on the altar, as Yahweh had commanded Moses. The flesh and the skin he burned outside the camp. Next, Aaron immolated the holocaust. His sons handed him the blood, and he poured it on the borders of the altar. Then they handed him the quartered victim, and its head too, and he burned these on the altar. He washed the entrails and legs, and burned them on the altar in addition to the holocaust. He then presented the people's offering. He took the goat for the people's sacrifice for sin, immolated it, and made a sacrifice for sin with it in the same way as with the first. Then he had the holocaust brought forward, and proceeded according to the ritual. Next, he had the oblation brought forward. He took a handful of it and burned it on the altar in addition to the morning holocaust. Finally, he immolated the ox and the ram as a communion sacrifice for the people. Aaron's sons handed him the blood, and he poured it out on the borders of the altar. The fat of the ox and of the ram, the tail, the fatty covering, the kidneys, the fatty mass over the liver, all of these he laid on the breast, and burned it all on the altar. With the breast and the right thigh, Aaron made the gesture of offering as Yahweh had ordered Moses. Then Aaron raised his hands toward the people and blessed them. Having thus performed the sacrifice for sin, the holocaust, and the community sacrifice, he came down and entered the tent of meeting with Moses. Then they came out together to bless the people, and the glory of Yahweh appeared to the whole people. A flame leaped forth from before Yahweh, and consumed the holocaust and the fat that was on the altar. At this sight the people shouted for joy, and fell on their faces. The Jerusalem Bible, Leviticus chapter 10. Nadab and Abihu, sons of Aaron, each took his censer, put fire in it, and an incense on the fire, and presented unlawful fire before Yahweh, fire which he had not prescribed for them. Then from Yahweh's presence a flame leaped out and consumed them, and they perished in the presence of Yahweh. And Moses said to Aaron, "That is what Yahweh meant when he said, 'In those who are close to me I show my holiness, and before all the people I show my glory.'" Aaron remained silent. Moses summoned Mishael and Elzaphan, sons of Aaron's uncle Uzziel, and said to them, "Come and take your brothers far away from the sanctuary, out of the camp." They came and carried them away, still in their tunics, out of the camp, as Moses had ordered. Moses said to Aaron and his sons Eleazar and Ithamar, "Do not disorder your hair, nor tear your garments. You are not going to die. It is with the whole community that he is angry. It is the whole house of Israel that must lament your brothers, the victims of Yahweh's fire. Do not leave the entrance of the tent of meeting, lest you die. For the chrism of Yahweh is on you." And they obeyed the words of Moses. Moses spoke to Aaron. He said, "When you come to the tent of meeting, you and your sons with you, do not take wine or strong drink. Then you will not die. This is a perpetual law for all your descendants. And so be it too, when you separate the sacred from the profane, the unclean from the clean, and when you teach the sons of Israel any of the laws that Yahweh has pronounced for them through Moses." Moses said to Aaron and his surviving sons, Eleazar and Ithamar, "Take the oblation that is left over from Yahweh's burnt offering. Eat the unleavened part of it beside the altar, because it is a most holy thing. Eat it in a holy place. It is the portion of Yahweh's burnt offering prescribed for you and your sons. This is the order I have received. The breast that was offered up and the thigh that was set aside you will eat in some place that is clean, you, your sons, and your daughters with you. This is the portion of the communion sacrifice of the sons of Israel that is prescribed for you and your sons. The thigh that was set aside and the breast that was offered up, when the fat was burnt, revert to you and your sons with you, after they have been presented before Yahweh by the gesture of offering, in virtue of a perpetual law, as Yahweh has ordered." Then Moses inquired about the goat offering as a sacrifice for sin, and found that they had been burnt. He was angry with Eleazar and Ithamar, Aaron's surviving sons. "Why," he asked, "did you not eat this victim in the holy place? For it is a most holy thing given to you to take away the fault of the community by performing the rite of atonement over it before Yahweh. Since its blood was not taken inside the sanctuary, you should have eaten its flesh there, as I ordered you." Aaron said to Moses, "Today they have offered their sacrifice for sin and their holocaust before Yahweh. If I had been concerned, if I had eaten the victim for sin today, would that have seemed good to Yahweh?" And when Moses heard this, he was satisfied. The Jerusalem Bible, Leviticus chapter 11. Yahweh spoke to Moses and Aaron and said to them, "Speak to the sons of Israel and say, of all the beasts on the earth, these are the animals you may eat. You may eat any animal that has a cloven hoof, divided into two parts, and that is a ruminant. The following, which either chew the cud or have a cloven hoof, are the ones that you may not eat. The camel must be held unclean, because though it is ruminant, it does not have a cloven hoof. The hyrax must be held unclean, because though it is ruminant, it has not a cloven hoof. The hare must be held unclean, because though it is ruminant, it has not a cloven hoof. The pig must be held unclean, because though it has a cloven hoof divided in two parts, it is not ruminant. You must not eat the meat of such animals, nor touch their dead bodies. You must hold them unclean. Of all that lives in water, these you may eat. Anything that has fins and scales, and lives in the water, whether in sea or river, you may eat. But anything in sea or river that has not fins or scales, of all the small water creatures and all the living things found there, must be held detestable. You must hold them detestable. You are not to eat their flesh, and you must avoid their carcasses. Anything that lives in water, but has no fins or scales, it is to be held detestable. Among the birds here and those you must hold detestable. They may not be eaten. They are detestable. The tawny vulture, the griffin, the osprey, the kite, the several kinds of buzzard, all kinds of raven, the ostrich, the screech owl, the seagull, the several kinds of hawk, horned owl, night owl, cormorant, barn owl, ibis, pelican, white vulture, stork, the several kinds of heron, hoopoe, and bat. All winged insects that move on 4 feet you must hold detestable. Of all these winged insects you may eat only the following: those that have legs above their feet, so that they can leap over the ground. These are the ones you may eat: the several kinds of migratory locusts, solham, hargal, and hagab locust in their several kinds. But all winged insects on 4 feet you are to hold detestable. By these you will be made unclean. Anyone who touches the carcass of one will be unclean until evening. Anyone who picks up their carcasses must wash his clothing, and will be unclean until evening. Animals that have hoofs, but not cloven, and that are not ruminant, you are to behold unclean. Anyone who touches them will be unclean. These 4-footed animals, which walk on the flat of their foot, must be held unclean. Anyone who touches their carcasses will be unclean until evening. And anyone who picks up their carcasses must wash his clothing, and will be unclean until evening. You are to hold them unclean. These are the small beasts crawling on the ground that you are to hold unclean: the mole, the rat, the several kinds of lizard, gecko, koa, lita, chameleon, and tinsameth. Of all the small beasts, these are the creatures that you are to hold unclean. Anyone who touches them when they are dead will be unclean until evening. Any object on which one of these creatures falls when it is dead becomes unclean: wooden utensil, clothing, skin, sackcloth, any utensil at all. It must be dipped in water, and will remain unclean until evening. Then it will be clean. If the creature falls into an earthenware vessel, the vessel must be broken. Whatever the vessel contains is unclean. Any food that is eaten will be unclean. If it is steeped in water, any liquid that is drunk will be unclean, no matter what its container. Anything on which a carcass of such a creature may fall will be unclean. Oven or stove must be destroyed, for unclean they are, and unclean they must be for you. All those springs, wells, and stretches of water will remain clean. Anyone who touches a carcass of theirs will be unclean. If one of their carcasses falls on any seed whatever, the seed will remain clean, But if the seed has been wet, and a carcass of theirs falls on it, then you must hold it unclean. If one of the animals that you use as food dies, then anyone who touches the carcass will be unclean until evening. Anyone who eats the dead meat must wash his clothing, and will remain unclean until evening. Anyone who picks up the carcass must wash his clothes, and will remain unclean until evening. Any small beast that crawls on the ground is detestable. You must not eat it. Anything that moves on its belly, anything that moves on 4 legs or more, in short, all the small beasts that crawl on the ground, you must not eat these, because they are detestable. Do not make yourself detestable with all these crawling beasts. Do not defile yourself with them. Do not be defiled by them. For it is I, Yahweh, who am your God. You have been sanctified and have become holy, because I am holy. Do not defile yourself with all these beasts that crawl on the ground. Yes, it is I, Yahweh, who brought you out of Egypt to be your God. You therefore must be holy, because I am holy. Such is the law concerning animals, birds, all living creatures that move in water, and every creature that crawls on the ground. Its purpose is to separate the clean from the unclean, creatures that may be eaten from those that must not be eaten. The Jerusalem Bible, 2 Samuel chapter 6. David again mustered all the picked troops of Israel, 30,000 men. Setting off with the whole force, then with him, David went to Baalah of Judah, to bring up from there the ark of God, which bears the name of Yahweh Sabaoth, who is seated on the cherubs. They placed the ark of God on a new cart, and brought it from Abinadab's house, which is on the hill. Uzzah and Ahio, the sons of Abinadab, were leading the cart. Uzzah walked alongside the cart of God, and Ahio went in front. David and all the house of Israel danced before Yahweh with all their might, singing to the accompaniment of lyres, harps, tambourines, castanets, and cymbals. When they came to the threshing floor of Nacon, Uzzah stretched his hand out to the ark of God and steadied it, as the oxen were making it tilt. Then the anger of Yahweh blazed out against Uzzah, and for this crime God struck him down on the spot, and he died there before the ark of God. David was displeased that Yahweh had broken out against Uzzah, and that place was called Perez Uzzah, as it still is today. David went in fear of Yahweh that day. How ever can the ark of Yahweh come to me, he said. So David decided not to take the ark into the citadel of David, and took it to the house of Obed-Edom of Gath. The ark of Yahweh remained in the house of Obed-Edom of Gath for 3 months, and Yahweh blessed Obed-Edom and his whole family. Word was brought to King David that Yahweh had blessed the family of Obed-Edom and all that belonged to him on account of the ark of God. David accordingly went and brought the ark of God up from Obed-Edom's house to the citadel of David with great rejoicing. When the bearers of the ark of Yahweh had gone 6 paces, he sacrificed an ox and a fat sheep. And David danced, whirling round before Yahweh with all his might, wearing a linen loincloth round him. Thus David and all the house of Israel brought up the ark of Yahweh with acclaim and with the sound of the horn. Now, as the ark of Yahweh entered the citadel of David, Michal, the daughter of Saul, was watching from the window and saw King David leaping and dancing before Yahweh, and she despised him in her heart. They brought the ark of Yahweh in and put it in the position inside the tent that David had pitched for it. And David offered holocausts before Yahweh and communion sacrifices. And when David had finished offering holocausts and communion sacrifices, he blessed the people in the name of Yahweh of SABBATH. He then distributed among all the people, among the whole multitude of Israelites, men and women, a roll of bread to each, a portion of dates, and a raisin cake. Then they all went away, each to his own house. As David was coming back to bless his household, Michal, the daughter of Saul, went out to meet him. "What a fine reputation the king of Israel has won himself today," she said, displaying himself under the eyes of his servant maids, as any buffoon might display himself. David answered Michal, "I was dancing for Yahweh, not for them. As Yahweh lives, who chose me in preference to your father and his whole house to make me leader of Israel, Yahweh's people, I shall dance before Yahweh and demean myself even more. In your eyes I may be base, but by the maids you speak of I shall be held in honor." And to the day of her death, Michal, the daughter of Saul, had no children. The Jerusalem Bible, Acts 10:9-22. Next day, while they were still on their journey, and had only a short distance to go before reaching Jaffa, Peter went to the housetop at about the 6th hour to pray. He felt hungry, and was looking forward to his meal, but before it was ready he fell into a trance, and saw heaven thrown open, and something like a big sheet being let down to earth by its four corners. It contained every possible sort of animal and bird, walking, crawling, or flying ones. A voice then said to him, "Now, Peter, kill and eat." But Peter answered, "Certainly not, Lord. I have never eaten anything profane or unclean." Again, a second time, the voice spoke to him, "What God has made clean, you have no right to call profane." This was repeated 3 times, and then suddenly the container was drawn up to heaven again. Peter was still wondering over the meaning of the vision he had seen, when the men sent by Cornelius arrived. They had asked where Simon's house was, and they were now standing at the door, calling out to know if the Simon known as Peter was lodging there. Peter's mind was still on this vision that the Spirit had to tell him, "Some men have come to see you. Hurry down, and do not hesitate about going back with them. It was I who told them to come." Peter went down and said to them, "I am the man you are looking for. Why have you come?" They said, "The centurion Cornelius, who was an upright and God-fearing man, highly regarded by the entire Jewish people, was directed by a holy angel to send for you and to bring you to his house and to listen what you have to say."